Queen Lorena stood at the large window of her private chamber and looked out at the two purple moons that hung in the dark sky above her world. She was tired of being alone and tired of the endless stream of men who wanted to marry her only for power. Every suitor who came to her palace had the same hungry look in their eyes when they saw her crown. None of them cared about who she really was beneath all the royal titles and golden jewelry. The Zalarian Empire stretched across 40 star systems, and she ruled them all. Her people were peaceful traders and scientists who had built cities that floated among the clouds and ships that could cross the galaxy in days. They looked up to her as their queen, but sometimes she wondered if anyone saw her as just Lyrina. The weight of the crown felt heavier each day, and the marble halls of her palace felt more like a beautiful prison. Her advisor, Commander Vex, knocked on the door and entered with his usual formal bow. He was a good man who had served her family for many years, but even he treated her like a precious statue that might break if touched the wrong way. "Your Majesty, the trade delegation from the Outer Rim has arrived," he said in his careful voice. "They are waiting in the main hall." Lyrina sighed and straightened her shoulders. Another day of meetings with merchants and diplomats who would smile and nod and agree with everything she said. She followed Vex through the long corridors lined with paintings of her ancestors. All of them looked stern and royal and nothing like the lonely woman who now wore their crown. The main hall was filled with beings from different worlds. Most of them wore their finest clothes and jewels, trying to impress her with their wealth. She took her seat on the throne and prepared for another boring afternoon of trade agreements and formal speeches. One by one they approached and bowed low and spoke in flowery language about the honor of meeting her. Then she saw him. Jake Murphy stood near the back of the group wearing simple, brown clothes and boots that had seen better days. He was human, which was not unusual since humans were common traders in this part of the galaxy. What caught her attention was that he was not looking at her throne or her crown. He was studying the ancient weapons that decorated the walls of the hall with genuine interest. When his turn came to approach her, he walked forward with easy confidence and gave her a polite nod instead of the deep bow she was used to. "Your Majesty," he said in a warm voice that had a slight accent she could not place. "Jake Murphy from the frontier colonies. I run cargo between the rim worlds, and I have to say, your palace has some impressive security. Very practical setup." The other delegates looked shocked at his casual manner, but Lyrina found herself sitting up straighter. No one had ever commented on her security before. Most visitors just gushed about the beauty of the palace or the richness of the decorations. "You have experience with security systems, Mr. Murphy?" Jake shrugged. "You pick things up when you haul cargo through some of the rougher systems. Pirates and raiders don't respect fancy titles much. A good defense system is worth more than all the gold in the galaxy when you're trying to keep your ship in one piece." For the first time in months, Lyrina smiled a real smile. Here was someone who spoke to her like she was a person instead of a goddess on a pedestal. "And what brings you to our capital, besides admiring our defenses?" "Trade routes mostly. The Rim colonies produce some unique goods, but they need better connections to the inner worlds. I was hoping to work out some agreements that would benefit everyone." Jake's eyes met hers directly as he spoke, showing none of the nervous fidgeting or calculating look she was used to seeing. The meeting continued, but Lyrina found herself watching Jake more than listening to the other delegates. He asked practical questions about shipping costs and safety protocols. When other traders tried to flatter her with empty compliments, Jake simply waited his turn and focused on the business at hand. He treated her like any other person he might do business with, and it was refreshing in a way that surprised her. After the formal meeting ended, most of the delegates stayed to network and try to gain her favor through her courtiers. Jake gathered his simple bag and headed for the door. Lyrina made a quick decision that would change both their lives forever. "Mr. Murphy," she called out. He stopped and turned back to her with raised eyebrows. "Would you join me for dinner tonight? I would like to hear more about these trade routes you mentioned." The invitation caused a stir among her advisors, but Jake just nodded. "I'd be honored, Your Majesty." "Should I wear something fancier than this?" He gestured to his simple clothes with a self-deprecating grin. "What you're wearing is fine," Lirana said. "I'm tired of fancy clothes and formal dinners. Let's eat in the small dining room and talk like normal people." That evening, Lorena discovered that Jake Murphy was unlike anyone she had ever met. He told her stories about life on the frontier worlds where people worked hard and looked out for each other. He had grown up on a mining colony where his parents had died when he was young. He worked his way up from loading cargo to owning his own small freighter. His life had been full of adventure and hardship, but he spoke about it with humor and warmth. Jake asked her questions too, real questions about what it was like to carry the responsibility of ruling so many worlds. He listened when she talked about the loneliness of command and the pressure of always having to be perfect. For the first time in years, someone was interested in her thoughts and feelings rather than what she could do for them. As the weeks passed, Jake extended his stay on her world. He said he was working on the trade agreements, but Lorena suspected he was staying for the same reason she kept finding excuses to spend time with him. They took long walks through the palace gardens where Jake told her about the strange plants and animals he had seen on different worlds. They had quiet dinners where they talked about books and music and dreams for the future. Jake never asked her for anything. He never tried to influence her political decisions or gain advantages for his business. He simply enjoyed her company and made her laugh in ways she had forgotten were possible. When she asked him why he treated her so differently from everyone else, he gave her that easy grin and said, "Crown or no crown, you're still just Lirna to me." 3 months later, when Jake asked her to marry him in the same simple way he did everything else, Lirna said yes without hesitation. She had finally found someone who loved her for herself, not for her power or position. The wedding was small and private, much to the shock of her court advisors who had expected a grand political alliance. As Jake moved into the royal palace and began learning the customs of her people, Lorena felt happier than she had in years. She had found her equal, her partner, and her best friend all in one humble cargo pilot from the edge of the galaxy. She thought she knew everything about the man she had married. She was very wrong. 6 months after their wedding, small things began to catch Lorana's attention. Jake had settled into palace life better than anyone expected. He learned their customs quickly and moved through the formal world of royal court with surprising grace. The servants liked him because he remembered their names and asked about their families. The minor nobles accepted him because he never pushed for political influence or special treatment. But Commander, Vex was not satisfied. "Something is not right about your husband," Vex told Lorana during one of their private security meetings. They were in her study reviewing reports from across the Empire. "His background checks out, but there are gaps in his history that trouble me." Lirna looked up from the trade agreements she was reading. "What kind of gaps?" "Small things that don't add up." "He claims he grew up on Kepler Mining Colony, but the records show that Colony was attacked by raiders when he would have been 15. Everyone was killed or taken as slaves. Yet he never mentions this tragedy, and there's no record of him being rescued or relocated." Vex pulled up a holographic display showing Jake's supposed history. Also, his knowledge of galactic politics is far beyond what a simple trader should know. "Maybe he's just well-read," Lorana said, though she had noticed the same thing herself. During dinner conversations, Jake sometimes mentioned details about military campaigns and trade disputes that had happened decades ago. When she asked where he learned such things, he always smiled and said he picked up information from other pilots and traders. Vex was not convinced. "Yesterday, during the state dinner with the Antarian ambassador, your husband correctly identified the significance of the ambassador's ceremonial medals. Those medals represent battles from the Antarian Civil War 30 years ago. The details he mentioned are not common knowledge, even among military historians." Lirana remembered that conversation. Jake had casually commented on the ambassador's service record and tactical innovations that had ended the Civil War. The ambassador had been impressed and surprised by Jake's knowledge. When questioned later, Jake laughed it off and said he had met some Antarian veterans at a trading post years ago. "I'll keep watching him," Vex said. "But I recommend increased security protocols until we know more." The next morning, Lirana decided to test her husband herself. She asked Jake to join her on a tour of the royal armory, something she had been planning to do anyway. The armory was deep beneath the palace and contained weapons from across their empire's history. Most visitors found it interesting, but overwhelming. Jake's reaction was different. He moved through the displays with the focused attention of an expert. When they stopped in front of a case containing ancient Zellerian swords, Jake studied them with obvious appreciation. "The balance on this one would be perfect," he said, pointing to a ceremonial blade with intricate engravings. "The weight distribution and the curve of the blade are designed for someone about my height and build." Master Corvin, the elderly keeper of the armory, looked surprised. "You have trained with similar weapons?" "I've handled a few swords over the years," Jake said casually. "You see interesting things when you travel between different worlds. Some colonies still use traditional weapons alongside modern ones." But as they continued the tour, Jake's comments became more specific. He identified the origin of weapons from distant systems and explained their tactical applications with the precision of someone who had used them in combat. When they reached the section displaying captured enemy weapons, Jake examined each one with the careful attention of a military analyst. "This rifle is modified for zero-gravity combat," he observed, studying a weapon taken from space pirates. "See how they've adjusted the recoil compensation and added magnetic clamps. Very practical for ship-to-ship boarding actions." Master Corvin exchanged glances with Lorena. "You seem to know a great deal about military hardware for a cargo pilot." Jake's easy smile never wavered. "Like I said, you pick things up. The frontier can be dangerous, and sometimes traders have to defend themselves. I've seen more than my share of pirate attacks and system conflicts." That evening, Lorena watched Jake more carefully during dinner. She noticed things she had missed before. The way he always sat with his back to the wall where he could see all the entrances to the room, how his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings even during casual conversation. The unconscious way he tested the weight and balance of his dinner knife before using it. "Jake," she said carefully, "tell me again about your childhood on Kepler Colony." For just a moment something flickered in his eyes, then the familiar warmth returned. "Not much to tell. Small mining operation, hard-working people. I was lucky to get off-world when I did. The life of a miner wasn't for me." "What happened to your parents? Accident in the mines?" "Happens too often in that kind of work." His voice carried genuine sadness, but Lirana caught the practiced way he delivered the explanation. Like a story he had told many times before. 2 weeks later, during the Festival of the Twin Moons, their peaceful world was shattered by violence. The festival was the biggest celebration of their year. The palace grounds were filled with citizens, enjoying food, music, and fireworks. Security was tight, but the atmosphere was relaxed and joyful. Lirana wore a simple dress instead of her royal robes and walked through the crowds with Jake at her side, both of them enjoying the rare chance to mingle with their people without formal protocol. The attack came without warning. 3 figures in dark clothing appeared near the main stage where children were performing traditional dances. They moved with deadly purpose toward the royal viewing area. Palace guards spotted them and raised the alarm, but the assassins were already in motion. What happened next changed everything. Lirana thought she knew about her husband. The first assassin leaped toward the royal platform where Lorena stood frozen. In shock, Jake moved faster than seemed humanly possible. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Lorena and spun her away from danger, while his free hand caught a thrown knife that had been aimed at her heart. The blade stuck in his palm, but he never flinched. The second assassin rushed them from the side. Jake released Lorena and met the attack head-on. His movements were precise and deadly efficient. He ducked under the assassin's energy blade and struck with his elbow, crushing the attacker's windpipe. The alien dropped without making a sound. The third assassin had a projectile weapon and was taking aim at Lorena from across the crowd. Jake spotted the threat and acted without hesitation. He grabbed a ceremonial spear from a nearby display and threw it with perfect accuracy. The weapon struck the assassin in the shoulder and spun him around, spoiling his shot. Palace guards swarmed the area and secured the surviving attackers while medics tended to Jake's injured hand. The entire fight had lasted less than 30 seconds, but in that brief time, Jake Murphy, the simple cargo pilot, had moved and fought like the most elite warriors in the galaxy. As they walked back to the palace under heavy guard, Lyrana's mind raced with questions. Jake seemed calm and focused, giving clear reports to Vex about what he had observed during the attack. His tactical analysis of the assassination attempt was detailed and professional, far beyond what any civilian should have known. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Lyrana asked when they were finally alone in their private chambers. Jake was wrapping his injured hand with medical tape. The knife wound was deep, but he had barely acknowledged the pain. "Frontier life teaches you to defend yourself. Like I've always said, the outer rim can be dangerous." "That wasn't frontier self-defense," Lyrana said firmly. "You moved like a trained soldier. You threw that spear like someone who had practiced the technique for years. And your analysis of the attack sounded like a military briefing." Jake looked at her for a long moment. She could see him weighing his words carefully. "I've had some training over the years. When you're hauling cargo through hostile space, basic combat skills can mean the difference between life and death." It was a reasonable explanation, but Lyrana no longer believed it. The man who had just saved her life was not the simple traitor she had married. Jake Murphy had secrets, dangerous secrets, and she was beginning to realize that everything she thought she knew about him might be a carefully constructed lie. As she lay awake that night listening to Jake's steady breathing beside her, Lyrana wondered who she had really married. The gentle man who made her laugh and treated her like an equal was real, she was sure of that. But there was another side to him, a deadly and professional side that he kept hidden beneath his humble exterior. She loved him, but she no longer trusted him completely. And in the dangerous galaxy they lived in, that distinction might soon become a matter of life and death for both of them. The emergency alarms began wailing at dawn, 3 weeks after the assassination attempt. Lyrana woke to find Jake already dressed and standing at their chamber window, watching the sky with intense focus. In the distance, she could see flashes of light that meant only one thing: space combat above their world. "The Kroner," Jake said quietly. "They're here." Lyrana's blood turned cold. The Kroner Dominion was the most feared military force in their region of the galaxy. They were a warrior species that conquered worlds for sport and enslaved entire populations. Her intelligence reports had suggested they were still years away from threatening Zalarian space. Commander Vex burst into their chambers without ceremony. "Your Majesty, we're under attack. 3 border systems have fallen in the last 6 hours. The Kroner fleet is moving toward our core worlds faster than we thought possible." "How many ships?" Lyrana asked, pulling on her royal robes. "At least 200 warships, possibly more. They're using some kind of new technology that's jamming our long-range communications. We can't contact our outer defense fleets." Vex looked grim. "They seem to know exactly where our weak points are." Jake turned from the window. "They've been planning this for months, maybe years. Someone gave them detailed intelligence about your military positions and defense systems." Both Lyrana and Vex stared at him. "How could you possibly know that?" Vex demanded. "Because it's what I would do," Jake said simply. "Hit the communication networks first to prevent coordinated defense, then strike the border systems to create panic and confusion. By the time the core worlds can organize a response, you've already won half the battle." The War Council meeting was chaos. Generals and admirals argued about defensive strategies while reports poured in of Kroner victories across 3 star systems. Their enemy was moving too fast and hitting too precisely for this to be a random invasion. Someone had given them inside knowledge of Zalarian military capabilities. Jake sat quietly in the corner, officially present only as the Queen's husband. But Lyrana noticed how carefully he studied the tactical displays and listened to every report. When General Kane proposed evacuating the civilian population to the inner worlds, Jake finally spoke up. That's exactly what they want you to do, he said. Create streams of refugee ships that they can track and follow. The Kroner aren't just conquering territory, they're studying your response patterns for future attacks. The room went silent. General Kane looked offended. And what makes you think you understand Kroner tactics, traitor? Jake stood up and walked to the main display showing enemy fleet positions. Because they're using a textbook multi-phase assault strategy. Phase 1 was intelligence gathering, probably going on for months. Phase 2 is the current rapid strike to create chaos. Phase 3 will be a coordinated push toward your capital while your forces are scattered and confused. He pointed to specific areas on the tactical map. They'll hit these 3 systems next, probably within the next 8 hours. After that, they'll consolidate their positions and prepare for a final assault on your homeworld. Admiral Torres stepped forward. Those are heavily defended systems. The Kroner would need detailed knowledge of our defensive positions to attack them successfully. Which they have, Jake said grimly. Someone has been feeding them information for a long time. The argument that followed was fierce. Some officers demanded to know how a simple cargo pilot could make such precise tactical predictions. Others insisted that Jake's analysis was too detailed to be guesswork. Lirana watched her husband handle the military questions with growing amazement. He spoke like someone who had planned similar operations himself when the reports came in. 6 hours later, confirming that the Kroner had attacked exactly the systems Jake had predicted, the room fell silent. General Kane looked at Jake with new respect and suspicion. Who are you really? Jake looked at Lirana for a long moment. She could see the internal struggle in his eyes. Finally, he seemed to reach a decision that would change everything between them. My real name is Colonel Jacob Murphy of the Terran Defense Corps, he said quietly. I've been undercover in Zellarian space for the past 2 years, gathering intelligence and monitoring potential threats to both our civilizations. The explosion of angry voices was immediate. Several officers reached for their weapons before Lorena raised her hand for silence. She felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Everything she believed about her marriage, her husband, and her own judgment had just been revealed as lies. You're a spy, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was, Jake sighed. My mission was to infiltrate your royal court and assess whether the Zellarian Empire would be a reliable ally against the Kroner threat. Humans have been tracking the Kroner expansion for decades. We knew they would eventually reach both our territories. And marrying me was part of your mission? Jake's face went pale. No, that was never part of the plan. I was supposed to get close to your government through trade connections and diplomatic channels. Falling in love with you was the one thing I never expected? Commander Vex had his weapon drawn and pointed at Jake. How do we know you're not working with the Kroner? How do we know this entire invasion isn't a human plot? Jake slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device that Lorena had never seen before. Because I'm about to prove which side I'm really on? He activated the device and spoke into it in a language that sounded like no human dialect she had ever heard. After a moment, another voice responded. Jake spoke again, giving what sounded like coordinates and tactical information. I've just contacted my command and requested immediate military assistance, Jake said to the room. The Terran Defense Fleet has been positioned in dark space beyond your outer rim for the past month, waiting for the Kroner to make their move. Admiral Torres looked skeptical. Even if that's true, human ships couldn't reach us in time to effect this battle, Jake smiled grimly. Human ships are faster than you think. And we've been preparing for this fight much longer than you know. He turned to Lorena, his eyes full of pain and regret. I know I've destroyed your trust in me. I know you probably never want to see me again. But right now, your people need every advantage they can get. The Kroner aren't just planning to conquer your empire. They're planning to use it as a staging ground for attacks on human space. Why should we believe anything you say? General Kane demanded. Because the Kroner will be here in 18 hours, Jake said. And when they arrive, you're going to need someone who understands their tactics and weaknesses. I've been studying them for 5 years. I know how they think and how they fight. Lyrana stood up slowly, feeling the weight of command and personal betrayal crushing down on her. The man she loved had been lying to her from the moment they met. Everything about their relationship had been built on deception, but the invasion was real and her people were dying. "What do you propose?" she asked, her royal voice cutting through. The emotional chaos in her heart. Jake moved to the tactical display and began highlighting enemy positions. The Kroner have one weakness. They're overconfident. They think they know everything about your capabilities because their intelligence is months old. But they don't know about human technology or the defensive upgrades my people have been secretly installing in your border systems. He looked around the room at the shocked faces of her military commanders. If we combine Zalarian defensive tactics with human offensive capabilities, we can turn their overconfidence against them. But it means trusting me completely, even after everything I've hidden from you? The room was silent except for the distant sound of alarms and the constant stream of battle reports. Lyrana looked at her husband, the stranger who had shared her bed and her heart while planning operations. That could determine the fate of civilizations. "Show us," she said finally. "Show us how to save our people." Jake nodded and began outlining a desperate plan that would require perfect coordination between two species who had just discovered they couldn't trust each other. As he spoke, Lyrana realized that the gentle cargo pilot she had married was gone forever. In his place stood a military commander whose hidden expertise might be the only thing that could save them all. But first, they would have to survive the next 24 hours. Jake stood in the palace armory, no longer the humble trader who had first admired these weapons months ago. The simple clothes were gone, replaced by dark combat gear that had been hidden in his personal belongings. The equipment looked ordinary. But Lyrana could see advanced technology woven into the fabric and built into the weapons he now carried. "The Kroner command ship will be heavily shielded," Jake explained to the mixed team of human and Zalarian soldiers gathered around him. "But they have one weakness. Their command structure is completely centralized. Take out their war chief and the entire fleet becomes confused and disorganized." Commander Vex studied the tactical display showing the approaching enemy fleet. "Even if we could reach their flagship, it would be suicide. The Kroner command ship has more firepower than our entire defense fleet, which is why we're not going to fight it directly," Jake said. He activated a holographic display that showed the internal structure of a Kroner warship. "Human intelligence has been studying their ship designs for years. We know about their weak points and security protocols." Lieutenant Amy Collins, one of Jake's hidden operatives, stepped forward. She had been posing as a communications technician at the spaceport for the past year. "We've been placing tracking devices and infiltration tools throughout this sector for months. Every major trading post and supply depot has human assets in position." Lyrana felt another wave of betrayal wash over her. How many of the people she trusted were actually human spies? How long had they been watching and planning while she lived in ignorance? "The mission is simple in concept but extremely dangerous. In execution," Jake continued, "we board the Kroner flagship during the battle and fight our way to their command center. While their attention is focused on the space battle, a small team can slip through their internal security." General Kane looked skeptical. "You're talking about boarding a ship with thousands of Kroner warriors while it's in the middle of a battle." "I'm talking about ending this war before it destroys both our civilizations," Jake replied. He looked directly at Lyrana. "The Kroner aren't just invading your space randomly. They're testing human and Zalarian military capabilities because they're planning something much larger. This is just the beginning." The space battle began at dawn. From the royal palace they could see the flashes of weapons fire in the sky as Zalarian defense fleets engaged the Kroner invasion force. The enemy ships were larger and more powerful than anything in the Zalarian navy, but Jake had been right about their overconfidence. Human ships seemed to appear from nowhere, moving faster than should have been possible and hitting Kroner formations with precision weapons that cut through their shields like paper. The Terran defense fleet had been hiding in the dark space between star systems, using technology that made them invisible to Kroner sensors. "Now we move," Jake said, leading his strike team toward the hidden hangar where a modified Zilarian courier ship waited. The vessel looked ordinary, but had been equipped with human stealth technology and infiltration gear. Lirana watched from the command center as her husband transformed completely into the warrior he had always been beneath. His disguise. His movements were precise and economical, his orders clear and direct. The Zilarian soldiers, who had initially resented taking commands from the human spy, now followed him with growing respect. The infiltration team consisted of 6 humans and 8 Zilarians, all volunteers who understood they probably would not survive the mission. Jake had insisted on leading personally, despite Lirana's protests and his own team's concerns about risking their commanding officer. The Kroner war chief will only respect a challenge from someone of equal rank, Jake had explained. If we're going to end this quickly, it has to be a direct confrontation between military leaders. As the stealth ship launched toward the enemy fleet, Lorena found herself praying to gods she had not believed in since childhood. The man she loved was flying toward almost certain death, and she could not even be sure if the love they had shared was real or just another part of his elaborate deception. The boarding operation went better than expected at first. Jake's intelligence about Kroner ship design proved accurate, and the infiltration team made it through the outer hull without triggering major alarms. They moved through maintenance corridors and service tunnels, avoiding the main troop areas where thousands of Kroner warriors prepared for the assault on the Zilarian homeworld, but as they approached the command section, resistance became fierce. Kroner security forces were not the mindless brutes that propaganda often portrayed. They were disciplined professional soldiers who fought with tactical intelligence and deadly efficiency. Lirena watched the battle through helmet cameras and communication feeds, her heart stopping each time Jake disappeared around a corner or engaged enemy forces in close combat. She saw him move with skills that made her realize how much he had been holding back during their entire relationship. This was who Jake Murphy really was, a warrior trained to fight the most dangerous enemies humanity had ever faced. The breakthrough came when they reached the command deck. The Kroner war chief was exactly as Jake had described, a massive alien warrior covered in ritual scars and battle armor. He stood nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms and natural weapons that could tear through metal. "I am War Chief Thrax," the alien commander announced in heavily accented Galactic Standard. "You have fought well for such small creatures, but your species will still kneel before the Kroner Dominion." Jake stepped forward, having discarded his ranged weapons for the ceremonial sword he had taken from the royal armory. The blade that had first caught his attention months ago now felt perfectly balanced in his hands, as if it had been made for this moment. "I am Colonel Jacob Murphy of the Terran Defense Corps," he replied formally. "I challenge you to single combat for control of this fleet." The ritual challenge was binding under Kroner military law, something Jake had learned during years of studying their culture. Thrax could not refuse without losing face before his own warriors. The massive alien drew his own weapons, 2 curved blades that glowed with energy fields. The duel was brutal and desperate. Thrax was physically superior in every way, but Jake fought with human intelligence and tactical training. He used the alien size against him, staying mobile and striking at weak points in the armor. The Zilarian sword proved remarkably effective against Kroner technology, its ancient metallurgy somehow resistant to energy weapons. Lirana watched in horror as Jake was thrown across the command deck by one of Thrax's powerful blows. The alien war chief moved in for the killing strike, but Jake rolled aside at the last second and drove his blade upward through a gap in the Kroner's armor. Thrax fell with a roar that shook the entire ship. As he died, his warriors looked uncertain and confused. Their command structure depended completely on the war chief's personal authority. Without him, they had no clear chain of command or operational orders. Jake stood over the fallen alien commander, bleeding from multiple wounds but still alive. He looked up at the Kroner bridge crew and spoke in their own language, something he had never revealed he could do. "I claim this vessel by right of combat," he announced. "Order your fleet to withdraw or face destruction." The Kroner warriors looked at each other uncertainly. Their culture respected strength above all else, but they had never been conquered by what they considered inferior species. Some moved to attack the human strike team, but others held back, unsure of the proper protocol. The moment of confusion was all Jake needed. He activated emergency beacons that had been placed throughout the ship by his infiltration team. The devices created massive electromagnetic pulses that disabled the Kroner command and control systems. Without central coordination, the Kroner fleet began to fall apart. Individual ship captains made their own decisions about continuing the battle, but most chose to retreat rather than fight without support from their flagship. The invasion that had threatened to destroy the Zalorian Empire crumbled within hours. Jake collapsed on the command deck, his injuries finally overwhelming his determination to stay conscious. The last thing he saw before the medics reached him was Lirana's face on the communication screen, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched her husband fall. The man who had deceived her about everything had just risked his life to save her people. She no longer knew what to believe about their relationship, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Jake Murphy was willing to die for her and her empire. Whatever else he had lied about, that sacrifice was completely real. Jake woke up 3 weeks later in the Royal Medical Wing with bandages covering most of his body and tubes running into his arms. The first thing he saw was Lorena sitting in a chair beside his bed, but she was not the same woman who had watched him collapse on the Kroner command ship. Her face was harder now, marked by the weight of decisions no ruler should have to make. "The doctors said you would live," she said quietly, though they were not sure for the first week. Jake tried to sit up, but pain shot through his chest where Kroner claws had torn through his armor. The invasion? Over. The Kroner fleet retreated after their command ship was disabled. Most of their ships made it back to their own territory, but they left behind enough prisoners for us to learn about their larger plans. Lirana's voice was steady, but Jake could hear the anger underneath. "You were right about everything. This was just the beginning of a much larger campaign. And our people? The alliance between the Zalorian Empire and the Terran Federation is now official. Your superiors arrived 2 days after the battle with a full diplomatic mission. It seems humanity has been planning this partnership for much longer than anyone realized." She looked at him with eyes that held both love and betrayal. "They also brought your real service record. Colonel Jacob Murphy, decorated veteran of 17 major campaigns, specialist in deep cover operations and alien warfare tactics." Jake closed his eyes. "Lirana, I know what you must think of me." "Do you? Because I'm not sure I know what to think anymore." She stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the palace gardens where they had taken so many peaceful walks together. "My advisors want me to annul our marriage. They say it was based on fraud and deception. Some of them think you should be tried for espionage against the crown. They're probably right. Are they?" Lirana turned back to face him. "Commander Vex has been investigating your activities for the past 2 years. Do you know what he found?" Jake shook his head, though he suspected he knew where this was leading. "Every piece of intelligence you gathered was used to protect Zalarian interests, not exploit them. Every military assessment you made strengthened our defenses. The trade routes you established brought prosperity to our outer colonies. Even your infiltration of the royal court resulted in better security protocols and stronger diplomatic ties with other peaceful species." She sat back down and took his hand, her touch gentle despite the steel in her voice. "So, either you're the worst spy in galactic history, or you were already protecting us long before you admitted who you really were." Jake squeezed her hand carefully. "I was supposed to assess whether your empire could be trusted as an ally. That assessment became personal the day I met you. When did you know you were going to stay? When you invited me to dinner that first night. You asked me to talk to you like a normal person instead of a queen. No one had ever done that before in any of my missions. I realized you were someone worth protecting, not just analyzing." Lirana was quiet for a long moment. "The doctors say you'll need months of recovery before you're fit for active duty again. Your superiors offered to reassign you to a desk job on Earth if you prefer." "What do you want me to do?" I want you to tell me the truth about one thing. When you said you loved me, was that real or was it part of your cover? Jake looked into her eyes and saw the vulnerability beneath her royal composure. This was the most important question she would ever ask him, and they both knew it. I've been trained to lie convincingly about almost everything, he said slowly. My background, my skills, my mission, my loyalties, but I was never trained to fake the way I felt when you laughed at my stories. I was never trained to pretend the piece I found sleeping next to you every night. The mission was real, but what I felt for you was the most honest thing in my life. Tears started running down Lorena's face. How do I know when you're telling the truth and when you're still playing a role? Because I'm done with roles. My cover is blown across the galaxy now. Everyone knows who Colonel Jacob Murphy really is. The only question left is whether Jake Murphy, your husband, is someone you can still love. She was quiet for several minutes, thinking about the choice that would shape both their futures. Finally, she spoke. My advisors have prepared two different ceremonies. One is an annulment that would dissolve our marriage and send you back to human space with full diplomatic immunity. The other is a new wedding, public this time. That would make you my official consort and military advisor. What did you tell them? I told them the choice wasn't theirs to make. Lorena stood up and walked to a closet Jake had not noticed before. She opened it and pulled out the ceremonial sword he had used to kill the Kroner war chief. The blade had been cleaned and polished until it gleamed like starlight. This sword has been in my family for 600 years. It was forged by the greatest weaponsmith in our history and has only been wielded by champions who proved themselves worthy. In battle, she placed the weapon across his lap. My ancestors believe that a sword chooses its true owner. This one chose you. Jake stared at the beautiful weapon, understanding the significance of her gesture. Are you sure? You risked everything to save my people. You gave up your cover, your mission, and nearly your life to protect an empire you were supposed to be spying on? If that doesn't prove your loyalty, nothing ever will. And the deception? The lies about who I was? Lorena smiled for the first time since he had woken up. You lied about your name and your background. You never lied about your character or your heart. The man who married me in that quiet ceremony 6 months ago is the same man who faced a Kroner war chief in single combat. I fell in love with Jake Murphy the person, not Jake Murphy the identity. She leaned down and kissed him gently. Besides, I'm a queen who rules 40 star systems and commands fleets of warships. Did you really think I married you because I thought you were ordinary? Jake laughed, despite the pain in his ribs. So what happens now? Now we plan a wedding that will announce to the galaxy that the Zalarian Empire and the Terran Federation are united not just by treaty but by marriage. You'll serve as my military advisor and help train our combined fleets to face whatever threats come next. And personally, we learn to trust each other again. No more secrets, no more hidden missions. We face the future together as equal partners. She touched the sword that lay across his lap. The queen and her champion, defending the peace we fought so hard to build. Jake picked up the sword and felt its perfect balance in his hands. It was a weapon worthy of the woman he loved and the life they were going to build together. The deception was over, but their real story was just beginning.